Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to this morning's webinar. My name is Sean Fine. I'm the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association. And this morning's webinar is number 37 in our series, and the topic is Sustainable Aviation Fuel, the potential opportunity for bioenergy. Before we kick off this morning, just a very brief introduction to our BIA and our organisation, as we have a number of new participants this morning, given that our topic is something we haven't covered before in a previous webinar. So the Bioenergy Association, Irish Bioenergy Association, was established in 1999. We're the representative body for the bioenergy sector in the island of Ireland. We work on behalf of members in biomass, biogas, biofuels, biochar, wood fuels and energy crops. Our main work is in the area of policy lobbying, advocacy and knowledge transfer, but we also have a broad range of members across many different sectors. We currently roll out a number of research and development projects as well, including the European Innovation Partnership Small Biogas Demonstration Programme, the 3C project in the Midlands Bioenergy Development Project. And also we manage and administer the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme. And further information is available on our website, www.airbia.org. This morning's topic is, before I go on to this morning's topic, I just let you know of our next webinar, which will take place on the 7th of December. We're hoping that we will cover on that particular webinar the animal byproducts regulations and its impact for biogas plants. Full details will be published through our social media and communication channels in the coming days and weeks. This morning's webinar is number 37, as I said in our schedule. If anyone would like to go back and review or look at any of our previous recordings, feel free to access them through our YouTube channel, or also links through our website, which anyone can look back on all of the recordings of all the previous webinars completed. As you can see, there's a wide diverse range of topics and themes covered to date. This morning we will receive a presentation from Agnes Thornton. Agnes is Director and Co-founder of Sustainable Flight Solutions, and we will follow that with a short panel discussion and take any questions which you may have. And attendees can submit questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible during the course of the Q&A. Just a very brief overview on this morning's webinar. So Sustainable Flight Solutions Ireland is focused on the development of the aviation sector and the sustainable aviation fuel market in Ireland and worldwide. The organisation's objective is to reduce aviation CO2 footprint by bringing together a wide variety of stakeholders in the aviation sector and across various supply chains associated with sustainable aviation fuel, academia, and others. SFS Ireland has been working on a feasibility study together with SkyNRG and supported by Avolon, Boeing and Orix Aviation, and more details can be found on the SFS Ireland website. And Agnes will outline her work in her presentation. And just to conclude on the overview or introduction, sustainable aviation fuel manufacturing technology is considered cutting edge. There is an initial analysis completed which does point to SAF providing a future circular bioeconomy opportunity for Ireland. And as part of the initial feedstock assessment phase of this feasibility study, SFS Ireland is engaging with the bioenergy sector to assess the current and planned availability of feedstocks in the sector, and again will give us an insight into future opportunities which might exist and arise there. So our speaker this morning is Agnes Thornton. Agnes has been working as an airline pilot for the last 10 years. During the COVID pandemic, Agnes completed an MSc in aviation leadership at DCU Business School, and her research focused on the barriers to SAF implementation by the airline industry. In 2020, she partnered with Darren Carty to found SFS Ireland, and we were delighted to have Darren speak on our panel at the National Bioenergy Conference back in October. So that concludes my introduction. Agnes, we're delighted to have you this morning, and I'd ask you now to share your screen and to give your presentation. Thanks, Agnes.
Thanks very much, Sean. Just checking that you can see that now.
Yeah, we can see it there, yeah, and see the slides. So perfect.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for having us. My name is Agnes, and yeah, well, Sean gave me already a very good introduction, so I will just be speaking to you this morning about sustainable aviation fuels and the connection to the bioeconomy sector that we've been working on over the last couple of years. Quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. Initially, just a quick introduction to our company itself, to aviation fuels, to the future fuels and what aviation fuels will look like going forward. A quick overview of what is sustainable aviation fuel and why we're looking at it now. And then probably the most interesting for today's audience is biogas as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuels, or SAFs. The policies or lack of policies that are there at the moment, and opportunities for Ireland going forward. SFS Ireland was founded about 2 years ago by myself and my, I can probably say that, yeah, we're both Aer Lingus pilots, and Darren Carty and myself have been flying for, myself for 10 years, he for a little bit longer than me, and during COVID, we obviously were looking for something else to do. And as Sean already mentioned, I went to DCU Business School and did aviation leadership, and Darren went to go back to his initial engineering career and completed a postgrad diploma in sustainable systems engineering. He focused on SAF as well, but from a technical point of view, whereas I kind of looked at SAF from an implementation point of view and the policies, barriers that do exist. And we kind of realized we're looking at the same thing from two different angles, and there is an absolute lack of it in Ireland at the time. So we initially started to connect our industry, because initially we thought it was an aviation problem. So we looked at it from an aviation point of view only. We teamed up with a professor in Limerick, in the Brunel Institute in Limerick, who was doing an awful lot of research on the topic. And we started with him together, a kind of advocacy drive initially. We formed called it a national platform. Together with the Brunel Institute, we ran a series of workshops as part of that. We included aviation stakeholders from airlines, airports, fuel producers, all the way to the universities. We had UCD, DCU, UL involved, and we just tried to get a conversation going between the research that had already been done, the implementation problems the industry was facing, and through mandates that will be coming in from the European Union. And we tried to get together a group to see what is the lay of the land in Ireland and what can we do to speed it up a little bit, because Ireland has been way behind in the development of sustainable aviation fuels compared to Europe. Part of that, we had a couple of presentations. We started initially with SILC, that's the Shannon International Leasing Conference, as the name says, down in Shannon. That was last year. That was quite good. It was the first time I think SAF was on the agenda in the leasing industry, who was quite interested in it. Then RGFI only recently. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. We did an online presentation at the UK Emissions Control Conference about 3 months ago. Then, as Sean has pointed out, Darren was present at the Arbia conference this month as well. The NCADF is the National Civil Aviation Development Forum, which is a group of aviation stakeholders, it kind of includes CEOs of airlines and airports, that advise government on policy decision making. We made a presentation to them. And then the Shannon Economic Task Force was appointed by the government recently to come up with a circular development plan for the Shannon estuary. SAF is a part of it. There is a lot of other parts to that task force as well, but we made a presentation and recommendation to that task force as well. Another point we kind of touched base on was a potential roadmap for SAF. All other countries in Europe have initially started that drive with a roadmap that has been asked for by respective governments, that has been missing in Ireland. So we tried that at the moment. That is a work in progress because there is no official, let's call it a mandate from government. We kind of said there is no point in probably wasting a lot of time in producing a document that may not be used. And so instead we started a feasibility study As a 5-company project, we recently brought out a press release. I'm not sure if you've come across. We're happy to share that later on in the chat box if anyone's interested. We are looking at the commercial viability of SAF production in Ireland, together with our partners in SkyNRG, who are a initially project development company in the Netherlands. They are now building their first SAF production facility in the north of the Netherlands. They're active in a load of different countries, including North America. And the project is supported by Boeing, Orix Aviation, and Avolon leasing. That's kind of an overview of us. A quick look at aviation fuels, and I don't want to go on about it too much. Basically, we're looking at different ways of powering aircraft in the future. There is the smaller planes, commuter and regional airplanes, that may be powered electrically or potentially with hydrogen fuel cells. When we talk about hydrogen, you've probably all come across a lot of talk of hydrogen for aviation. There is 2 strains to it. So hydrogen can either be used as a fuel directly in an airplane. Problem with that is it's just takes up a lot of space and safety is an issue in it for now. So putting hydrogen, a hydrogen fuel tank as such onto a bigger airplane is not going to be a viable option. So hydrogen fuel cells, as they're called, are only an option for smaller aircraft. The other way hydrogen can be used is when hydrogen can be paired with carbon dioxide, and then it actually becomes SAF. And SAF is, from a specification point of view, exactly the same as Jet A1 is what we have in our aircraft at the moment. And therefore, it can then be put into existing aircraft engines. It can be used the same way as we use our jet fuel at the moment. So going forward, any kind of medium to long haul airplanes will be requiring SAF, because there is no other way of powering them. It would be a total redesign of aircraft, and that's not going to happen, we don't think. So for the medium and long haul market, we are looking at sustainable aviation fuels. I also have to say, at the moment, we cannot put pure or what we call neat SAF into an aircraft engine. It has to be mixed with Jet A1. That's due to specifications on the engines, but there are test flights being done with 100% SAF, but that's not going to be an issue for production because demand is way outstrip supply for a very long time yet. This is kind of what ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, is looking for, and IATA. So basically, the decarbonisation of the aviation sector is relying on this what's called basket of different measures. Initially, a few carbon offsets and potentially carbon capture. Efficiency are already being worked on for aircraft engines. New propulsion technologies, and the majority of it is going to be from sustainable aviation fuels, because there is just no other way of flying those airplanes, those kind of airplanes. What makes fuel sustainable is, again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you see on the left-hand side, the CO2 that is being emitted during every single stage of the production of the fuel has to be included in the calculation going forward. Whereas if we burn SAF in our aircraft engines, there is still a CO2 emission coming out at the end, but that has been absorbed at the start. So therefore, it is considered a reduced CO2 reduced fuel. There is a difference in the reduction of the CO2 depending on the pathway of production of those fuels. There are a lot of different pathways, a lot of different options to make the sustainable aviation fuel. We'll go into them later on a little bit, but it's not a set number. It is quite fluent at times. As I said before, we have to blend the neat SAF with our normal Jet A1. It goes into a blending facility and then goes into an airport fuel farm. It has to arrive at the airport fuel farm certified to the specifications of normal Jet A1 fuel. And then it's being pumped into the same hydrant system as any normal fuels at the moment. So for us, the fuel that arrives at the airplane is no different. So it all happens at the very start of the supply chain. The reason this is all happening now, but Ireland has been a little bit behind on that, is there is a Refuel EU proposal currently going through the final stages of at the European Commission. There is a mandate coming in for SAF, but those mandates are basically a blend for SAF going into aircraft engines. So in 2025, 2% of the fuel going into an aircraft engine has to be SAF. And it increases as the years go on. You see 2030 to be 5% and so on. From 2030 onwards, there's going to be a sub-mandate for so-called synthetic fuels or e-fuels. So that's the fuels produced with hydrogen. Not only that is coming in, there's also a phasing out of the free ETS allowances. At the moment, airlines receive a free allocation of allowances under the European Trading Scheme. Those will be reduced to 0 over the next 10 years, which means they have to pay for their CO2 emissions more so than just offsetting them with their free allowances from the ETS. There's also potential carbon taxes, ticket taxes, so the price of flying on normal Jet A1 is going to increase. It's not a fair comparison to just compare the price of jet fuel as it is at the moment to SAF as it will be when we produce it, because of all those kind of add-ons. As the price of operating with jet fuels goes up, obviously that price gap to SAF will be closed a little bit, but it won't be closed entirely, and it may never be closed completely, but we have to try and narrow it as much as we can. On the right-hand side, you can just see these are the different pathways that are predicted to come into play over the next couple of years. HEFA, which is the green one, is the most common one at the moment. Then we have for the bioeconomy sector, it will be gasification of Fischer-Tropsch and the alcohol to jet route, which is the kind of light green and the light blue ones. And then the power to liquid, which is the e-fuels, is going to increase quite significantly as hydrogen comes online, hopefully in the early kind of 2030s as we see it at the moment. As I said there a minute ago, there's a few different ways of producing SAF from renewable gas or from biomethane. It depends on the feedstocks, it depends on the availability, it depends on a load of different things, but we are looking at all of them as part of the current feasibility study. We're looking at the moment to find feedstocks that are A, available in Ireland, B, scalable in Ireland, and C, at a price that can be made commercially viable somehow. That pre-feasibility study runs at the moment, and we're expecting that to be finalised in Q1 of 2023. When that does, we're hoping to identify 1 or 2 pathways that a full feasibility study will look into in the following year then. And that will then come up with a viable, hopefully a viable business case for that. But which pathway will be chosen is to be established yet. I might bring Sean back in on this afterwards. We have been looking at kind of policy development from an aviation perspective. There hasn't been much so far because it's obviously an entirely new industry. It's all still going through the European Commission at the moment. And the position of the Irish government for now has been we kind of wait and see what happens in Europe. And then it has to be implemented on a national level. Implementation obviously hasn't happened yet because the mandates will only kick in from 2023. But to then make all this into a policy, there is going to be a mad rush for it. It's obviously time is of the essence. We looked at biogas policies, again, a very, very new sector. And I'm sure, happy to hear any views. I'm sure you're kind of facing the similar issues. I was reading in the 2019 report that Sean shared with us, and he's been saying they are working on an update of that. We were calling for 40 million budget to kickstart the AD sector in Ireland. and then in the budget 2023, 12 million were announced over 4 years. There's obviously a massive gap. Us as aviation stakeholders, we need an AD sector, we need a biogas sector in Ireland, because we see that as a very viable option for our industry to have a national SAF industry. But there has to be a cross-departmental conversation. We have had talks with the Department of Energy and Department of Transport. We've recently touched base with the Department of Agriculture, and it's three departments that have probably not been speaking to each other before much, and we would like to see that changing. We have tried to make contact and hoping to see if we can start a conversation with all three of them. We think policy development has to happen in all three sectors. Everybody's calling for it. Every stakeholder we have been talking to as part of our feedstock assessment has been saying policy support is one of their biggest problems. We would like to line that up, because if everybody does their own thing, the overall cause is probably not going to be sorted. And we have one of the two biggest sectors in Ireland, aviation and agriculture. If they can work together, I think we can have a huge success going forward. I think there's a question. I might go into that now.
We can come back to the questions, Agnes, if you want to finish.
I'll go back to the questions.
Yeah,
okay, very good.
We can come back to the questions. Yeah, thank you.
So the ultimate reason of why I'm here and what we're looking for today is we need to see what is happening on the AD landscape in Ireland, because we need to know how many is going to be operating, how much is going to be their output, what is the feedstock availability, and what is the predictions of CO2 and biomethane that will be available that our industry could potentially utilize for SAF production. So this is the overall reason why we're here. On the right hand side is just a snapshot of the press release that went out recently, where we partnered with Avolon and Boeing and Orix on the feasibility study for Ireland. Those are the kind of data points we are looking for. And for the feasibility study going forward, we're happy to engage with anyone that is on the call. If you want to get in touch with Sean, or even just send us a message in the Q&A tab, we'll be happy to talk to each and every one of you on a one-on-one basis. We're trying to get numbers and figures onto those developments in Ireland. We need the AD sector to operate in order for our sector, a SAF industry, to be able to be established in the next kind of 5 to 8 years is the initial timeline. Hydrogen won't be online until the early 2030s. Well, that does look very promising. We need to bridge that gap, and we also need to have other opportunities. And we think that biomethane is a huge opportunity for us. So please do get in touch if there is anything that you'd like to share, or if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer all of them. I think that's most of it. Oh yeah, then I just put a summary kind of together. What this can offer the biogas industry: it will give demand security. We are an industry in aviation that is very used to long-term off-trade contracts. Normal contract durations run from 10 to 15 years, should not be a problem at all. Regional development, regional employment is obviously a big factor in Ireland, and we see a kind of new emerging domestic industry starting up with massive growth potential for rural Ireland. A SAF manufacturing industry would deliver for Ireland a sustainable economic growth. That is what the current government is looking for as well. We could become part of a circular bioeconomy similar to what is currently being assessed in the Shan estuary. They have published a Master Plan 2040, where they're trying to put all of those things together. We do have to make sure that there's no displacement effects with any of the feedstock, but I think we can offer that in Ireland as well. And as I already said, regional development is going to be a big plus for this. That's all I have. I think there's questions coming in. I'll go back to them now. thanks very much. And as I
Thanks.
said, any questions, please do get in touch.
Thanks very much, Agnes, and thanks for your presentation. Certainly a very interesting area, and again, we're speaking about the opportunities and potential for biomethane and biogas, and the opportunities for that sector. Before we go into the questions, just a quick couple of points. I know you mentioned our own policy paper going back to 2019, so maybe just update attendees on that. In 2019, we did put together a paper in association and partnership with CRE at that time as to how a biomethane biogas industry could be mobilized. There are a few very key principal points within that document which stand strongly again today. So one would be that we need a phased implementation in terms of mobilizing a sector. Two, that support is required in some form, ideally in the form of an operational support to bridge the gap between production cost and potential the cost of gas, although that has changed dramatically since we published our paper. There's also a very significant amount of detail within our paper about the opportunities for the agricultural sector in terms of digestate and fertilizer and alternative fertilizers, organic fertilizers. But I suppose I just want to inform attendees that our document was focused on delivering the 1.6 terawatt hour target at that time. Obviously, Minister Ryan has broadened that target since to 5.7. The government did not publish any specific plan around how that 1.6 terawatt hours would be delivered. Our document does publish a plan as to how that could be delivered in a phased approach, 3 phases. And the 40 million that you speak of, Agnes, is an operational support to get 1/3 of that, or get the industry mobilizing up and running. So we will be we are updating our paper. We've begun the process of that because we've had a lot of change since. Obviously, COVID has come. The energy crisis is here. Gas prices have dramatically increased. We have a Repower EU policy proposal which sets ambitious targets in terms of biomethane across Europe and development of it in Ireland and across Europe. So there's lots of things have changed since. So we are updating our paper, and we'll be engaging with our members over the coming weeks and months to get that updated and published. And we do hope to engage with yourself as well, Agnes, as an RBA member, around the opportunities around SAF and what we can include in the paper to kind of broaden the conversation. So there are a number of questions coming in, and maybe we go to them and we take them one by one. And then I have a few questions myself. Maybe we can mingle in between as well. So if we start at the top with Conor, and thanks, Conor, for your question. Is the production of SAF through whatever method ultimately limited by feedstock availability? Conor knows that he works with the renewable diesel for road transport. Renewable diesel is sometimes seen as a transition fuel, not a destination. So would you like to elaborate maybe, Agnes, on that question first, around what you're finding maybe to date in terms of your feasibility study around feedstock availability, or what types of feedstocks are you looking at the potential for?
Thanks, Conor. Yes, the production of SAF is limited by feedstock availability, but this is part of the kind of feasibility study at the moment. We're trying to see what is out there. There is so many different pathways and different technologies that could potentially be used, that not all of SAF that needs to be produced to meet those mandates has to come from the one feedstock or the one technology. And that might answer actually Shane's question further down below as well. The study is agnostic in terms of feedstocks and technology. So we're examining everything at the moment. This is the kind of pre-feasibility stage. We're looking at everything that is available, and we're looking to identify kind of 1 or 2 pathways probably that we're then including in the full-scale feasibility study next year. But for now, everything is on the table and everything is included. And whether it's a transition fuel or a destination, it will be a destination for aviation, I think, because the road sector is like electrification of road vehicles is much more realistic than electrification of long haul or bigger aircraft.
Yes.
That's just not going to be an option. The commuter airplanes, for example, Connemara to the Aran Islands, yes, they will be electrified eventually.
Yes.
but
Yes.
going.
And is there any electric planes currently available, just as a matter of interest, or is that?
There is a lot of them are in the kind of test phase, but they are 3, 4, 5, like 10 seaters. They're very small. They're those kind of commuter style planes.
Okay.
Again, hydrogen as a liquid fuel will go into potentially as big as planes as currently operating the Aer Lingus regional routes, the ATRs, the turboprops. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with those. So that kind of size could eventually operate on something else as well. But anything bigger than that, it will be running on fuel, on sustainable aviation fuel mixed with jet fuel. And it's not that the jet fuel market is going to stop tomorrow, because it still has to be mixed. The numbers involved are so big. Just to go back to Sean, you said about the 5.7 terawatt hours that the government has set as a new target. Yeah. We're looking for 2 terawatt hours, and that's to produce 100 kilotons of SAF. That's not even 10% of the fuel that's been put through Dublin Airport. So it will be a long, long time yet before jet fuel will be completely gone, if ever. But it's about reducing the footprint as much as we possibly can.
And just if I could follow on with a question I had myself on Connor's question before we get to the next question. You've mentioned in your slides there about different technology pathways. So you mentioned about, so some of them are potential solid, there's opportunities for solid biomass material to be gasified as well, is that? Or is this purely biogas, biomethane from anaerobic digestion? But my understanding is that you're open to other feedstocks as well, because there are some members on our call this morning which are in the solid biomass space. So
we have been engaging with a few feedstock suppliers from that market as well. So solid biomass and forestry residues, that like that is all being assessed as well. Municipal solid waste, for example, has been assessed as well. That it's all part of the initial assessment. So yeah, the solid biomass can be put into it as well.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question, and again it's from an anonymous attendee, but aviation fuel currently supplied in home heating market as kerosene. Do you think that SAF will do the same, or will there be too little that it will be all consumed by aviation, or is there a shelf life of SAF? So
well, I think the shelf life question I've answered before. SAF is going to be the future for medium and long haul aviation.
So there's no issue with long-term storage of SAF, I think is more their point, is it? There's no issue with long-term storage.
No, there is need. Once it becomes blended, it's the same as normal Jet A1.
Okay.
So it will face the same restrictions as any normal jet fuel as well.
Yeah.
Is there going to be too little that will be all consumed by aviation? Most definitely. Demand will not meet, or supply will not meet demand.
And it probably come down to economics, will it, in terms of what market can pay more? Can the aviation sector pay more than, for instance, the domestic user that might want a renewable fuel in the form of a SAF for home heating? So that's going to be a fundamental question and point here, I suppose, too, for where does the economics sit. And I don't know, you probably are only getting into that from the point of view of your work as of yet.
Yeah, the economics of it are part of the end feasibility study now, but I think the once it has actually been processed to SAF, then the SAF will be bought by the aviation industry. But whether the feedstocks will be available to the SAF production, I think, is more the question.
Okay, Shane has a question. Thanks, Shane, for joining. Are you examining just GTL technology or any form of SAF?
Yeah, I think I answered earlier on. Yeah, it's agnostic in terms of technology and feedstocks. We're looking at everything at the moment.
Okay. Patrick, then, a carbon-containing fuel like SAF still carries the negative global effects of contrails. How can this be addressed? So I think you've covered that in your presentation around that renewable fuels, obviously it's a circular carbon cycle. So from the feedstock production, would that be your answer to that question, or?
Yeah, so there is a lot more to aircraft emissions than just the fuel. You're very, very right there, and contrails are a big part of it. Contrails are kind of being looked at separately at the moment. There's a trial running in Europe around Brussels where contrails can potentially be avoided through air traffic control, basically through better management of where the aircraft fly. Contrails happen because of humidity in layers of air. They may potentially only be a couple of thousand feet, could be 2,000 to 3,000 feet thick, if you like. So if an airplane is actually told to fly higher or lower, the contrails may be avoided. So there is other ways to look at the effects of the CO2 footprint of the aviation industry, including contrails, through things like it's called the Single European Sky Agreement as well, which includes all the air traffic control units across Europe, and they're looking at the things like contrails. They're looking at things like reroutings. So rather than having an airplane going in zigzags across Europe, if they can get a direct line, obviously they'll have an awful lot less emissions. That's due to traffic volumes and stuff, but trials like that are ongoing. The other thing that has been looked at is obviously engine performance and fuel burn. Newer aircraft coming in line are all an awful lot lighter. They're made from composite materials. Being lighter aircraft, you burn less fuel, there'd be less CO2 emissions from that. So a lot of other things are being looked at in the aviation industry to reduce the footprint.
Okay, thanks very much, Agnes, and thanks, Patrick, for your attendance and question. Next question, again, maybe more of a clarification of point, and thanks, Shane, for your point here. Just to note that SAF has been placed in the market in Ireland previously and is supported by the Biofuels Obligation Scheme, i.e. BOS certs can be claimed for sustainable aviation fuel and used by obligated parties to satisfy their biofuels obligations. So thanks, Shane, for that.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, it is, but it's very unclear at the moment. And there's a consultation opening early next year for the biofuel obligation scheme. I think we're hoping that SAF will play a bigger part in it afterwards. We're hoping to put in a contribution to that.
I'm sure Shane will be happy to talk to you further, Agnes.
I was just going to say, yeah,
so,
happy to engage further on that. I think that will be
okay. Good. So thanks for that, Shane. In terms of the next question, so question from Keith, and this probably comes down to the crux of the question, really. What kind of long-term pricing can you offer or can be offered? And will you provide a premium on the fossil price for biogas and or biomethane? So do you want to comment on that, Agnes? Or it was a question I had myself around the current pricing of SAF as well, and where it sits at the moment, and has there been a dramatic increase in recent times? Or
it entirely depends on the feedstocks, the pathways that are being used. The biggest part of a SAF price is the feedstock price. So that makes up the biggest portion of it. Also depends on locations and the infrastructure. Where does the fuel have to be transported to? I would love to be able to give you a price. I can't.
Yeah.
At the moment, it can lie anywhere between 3 to 6 times the price of Jet A1. The aviation industry is calling for supports, obviously, same as the biomethane industry. We believe, though, that's why I said earlier on, there has to be a cross-departmental discussion. If subsidies and financial incentives can be provided probably at the start of the supply chain, it might be a lot more helpful than giving them to the end of the supply chain. So rather than subsidizing a very high price of SAF, would it not make more sense to subsidize the price of the initial feedstock, because that's what, and then have a cheaper, inverted commas, end product?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because even we're currently working ourselves on the costs associated with biogas, biomethane production, and the costs dramatically change depending on the types of feedstocks you use. So if you pay farmers for silage to produce biogas, biomethane, obviously that's a significant greater, there's a significant greater feedstock cost than if you use waste that might necessarily require the same, which have the same economic value, or the production is totally different. So it really depends, the economics from a biogas biomethane sector, from our members' perspective, dramatically change depending on the types of feedstocks you use. So that will obviously then have an impact on the types of on the cost of the output, the biomethane biogas output. So I can imagine how it's a difficult question to answer, but really that's the point. And even in the last year, that cost for some feedstocks has dramatically increased compared to other feedstock costs. So how do we build into a future policy that risk reduction in terms of dramatic increases in costs associated with producing certain feedstocks in the future is a big challenge to plot our way through, from the point of view of putting a policy in place that encourages and develops the sector and industry.
And that's very similar to, I think, what our industry is facing. And just to go back to what Keith was saying, and you hit the nail on the head there, this is what we're trying to do. We need the AD sector to get off the ground.
Yeah.
We need that industry to develop.
Yeah.
Because we see it as a great opportunity. Some other feedstocks that are available in other countries in Europe are not available in the required quantities in Ireland.
Yes.
Whereas we have one of the largest agricultural sectors, I believe, in Europe. So there is definitely opportunity for us here. And I think we have to look at how we can align our policies in aviation with the likes of policy in agriculture and biomethane industry.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it won't make sense to align them now before it's a nascent industry for all of us. The SAF industry is in its infancy, the AD industry is in its infancy. Even though, yes, there are some operational in Ireland, but the few we've spoken to are struggling with policy support as well and with direction. And if we can make sure that those are our goals are all aligned at the end of the day, and I think if we can talk to each other, then eventually the government's partners will talk to each other, and hopefully we'll get places.
Okay, Agnes, just a couple of follow-on questions and points there. So Patrick is thanking you for your comprehensive answer about contrails. Keith is saying that it sounds good, would help get an AD industry off the ground. And Shane is happy to engage with you, and thanks for your interesting presentation. Great to see an Indigenous company pushing forward on this. And Keith has a question there. Could you maybe give us an outline of how the trading, would you use a trading house to buy fuel, or do you intend to do it in-house? So can you maybe explain how that trading system works currently with regard to aviation fuel, maybe, and how then would there be any potential changes as a result of the introduction of SAF within that?
Not 100% sure if I get you right, Keith, so please correct me if
I imagine it's about
get it wrong.
What the relationship would be between what's the system at the moment? Is it big fuel companies that have?
It is big fuel companies that's being delivered into like Dublin Port, and then it's been either trucked or piped to the airport. There is a big fuel farm, and it's been housed there, and from there it goes onto the airplanes. There is two fuel suppliers. Like at the moment, it's Shell and Aquagreen, that will provide all the fuel. Because it has to be blended, so it's not a set in stone procedure yet, but an AD operator, for example, would bring the biomethane to a separate SAF production facility. So that SAF production facility could be, let's say for argument's sake, it's part of the Shannon master plan, right? Now, it could be anywhere in Ireland. I don't want to say it's going to Shannon.
Yeah, just as an example, yeah.
Yeah, so the biomethane is trucked, hopefully in hydrogen trucks, down to Shannon. That's the SAF is being produced out into Shannon. Now, that is the neat SAF. That is not going to go into the aircraft engine. That is then being put into a blending facility. That could be part of a refinery. For example, oil refinery down in Cork could be blended there. and from there it's been then delivered to the airport fuel farms, whether that's Shannon, Cork, or Dublin. And so the end product in the airport is going to still come from the same source, if you like. Who is going to do the blending is a question that is yet outstanding. Fuel producers are looking at that, I think, to potentially play a part in as a blender.
Yeah. Well, certainly at the moment you'd have, with regard to the road fuel mix, we have a blend within that of ethanol and biodiesel within diesel and petrol. So that's being done currently at the refining point, or at it's not being done at the fuel supplier point. So it's it would, I expect, be a similar scenario for SAF into aviation fuel, that will be done at a large scale at the industrial production process level.
Yeah, it'll, you have a SAF production plant, but then it has to be blended in with the jet fuel. So wherever that jet fuel is coming in, whether that is being piped in to, there's a pipeline going into Shannon Port, then obviously you have the Whitegate refinery down in Cork, and then it's coming into Dublin Port. So most likely, I would assume there's going to be blending facilities in one of those.
We have a question. Sorry, yeah, no, I think that hopefully clarifies the question there for Keith. We have a question there, and I can take it myself, and maybe if you want to comment as well, Agnes, but can the AD sector really ever scale up to the massive size at which it could decarbonise heat, terrestrial transport, aviation and industry? And obviously there's lots of uses, and this is a fundamental question for the biogas biomethane industry. When an industry is developed, where does that biogas, where is it used? There's lots of opportunities to use it. I suppose it will ultimately come down to what areas are potentially hard to decarbonize with other technology options. Where can biogas biomethane step in those scenarios? So it could be industrial heat, it could be heavy duty transport, it could be aviation. But really, ultimately, it will come down, and would you agree, Agnes, to the potential price point? So which of these sectors can pay the most from the point of view of the producer? And is that a fundamental concern for you? Or will aviation, do you think, be able to pay more than heavy duty transport, road transport, or industrial heat? That's the fundamental question. What would your feedback be on that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it comes down to price at the end. We have been speaking to a few people, though, who are often thinking that the renewable heat obligation scheme, for example, is only going to kind of apply to 50% of what is going to be produced in Ireland. So the rest will go onto the open market. Road transport, as I said before, I think it was Keith who might be quite right there. It might only be a transitional point for road transport, because there is opportunities to electrify that or run it on hydrogen. In some cases, and maybe not in all, but in some cases, yeah. And aviation, I think, will for a very long time rely on sustainable aviation fuels. It's also a big industry in Ireland. Again, per capita, one of the biggest in Europe. There is a huge opportunity, I think, for our airports as well, just by the way we are positioned at the edge of the Atlantic, and airplanes sometimes land in Ireland to pick up some fuel to go to the States, for example. So we see a business case even in that, to if there was ever a situation where we'd have so much sustainable fuel that we can't use it all ourselves, there is potential for that to be used by stopover customers, if you like. Yeah. And I suppose just to maybe answer the question as well, from the biogas producer's perspective, there is a lot of opportunity to produce biogas biomethane here if the policy framework is right. You mentioned about the renewable heat obligation scheme. We still don't know. We have confirmation from government that there is going to be a renewable heat obligation scheme introduced. However, we're not clear what the terms and conditions or architecture of that scheme will be. So we wait and see, and we are have been informed that there is going to be a consultation early in the new year around the shape and size and scale of that renewable heat obligation scheme. So there's an awful lot of
areas that need prioritizing in terms of development of an AD sector, but scale is going to be a challenge around that. We're inundated with calls from potential energy users that want biogas, biomethane. However, fundamentally, it all comes down to the cost and what are the sectors, the different sectors, willing to pay for the output. And a fundamental principle of our organisation and of our policy paper going back to 2019, which will remain within our policy paper, is that we can't just we have to ensure that there's a fair return for everyone along the supply chain in terms of the production, because if there isn't, the production won't materialize. So the farmer needs to be paid for their feedstocks, and the AD producer, the developer, fuel provider needs to also be paid for their output, or else ultimately the industry won't survive. We've seen in the past where support schemes were introduced for the sake of introducing support schemes that weren't sufficient to ensure that everyone received a fair return along the supply chain, and as a result, they weren't successful. So we can't have that scenario here, because we've had enough of false starts from the point of view of a biogas, biomethane industry. When an industry is mobilized, it needs to be mobilized on the basis that everyone receives a fair return. So if I could move on, then there's a couple of other questions have come in.
Sean, can I just add something there?
Agnes, yes, of course.
Scale up to the massive size that we would need. For us, the biogas is a part of a feedstock that Ireland can provide. It's not going to provide all the sustainable fuel that we need, but we need to bring those bits together.
Yes.
So whatever size it's going to will be beneficial to us.
And sustainability is obviously a key part of this too. So the Renewable Energy Directive sets out very stringent sustainability criteria on bioenergy in general and the specific elements within that. So obviously sustainability is going to be very important too for your sector, in terms of that the materials or feedstocks are produced sustainably in a sustainable way, and that
this is exactly the point why I think we should engage in the policy discussions now, because we're bound by these sustainability criteria. Feedstocks are all on a list for us that we can only use these and these feedstocks. If we don't get those feedstocks, we can't use the fuel. So those questions have to be answered now, because otherwise we're developing an AD sector that the aviation industry can't use at the end of the day, and then that will obviously be counterproductive.
A question there, Agnes, do you ever see the aviation sector itself developing biomethane facilities to satisfy its own requirements? So for instance, would you see the aviation sector or some elements of the aviation sector potentially developing biogas, biomethane facilities and actually contracting with organizations to provide feedstocks? Or do you see the model as being third parties providing that biogas, biomethane to the refining sector?
A very good question.
Have you thought about that?
We've thought about it. I don't think I can speak for the entire aviation sector here, though. There is, yes, two different models. We're looking at it from a point of view that we need an AD sector because we need the biogas and the biomethane. How that is happening, we're open to anything. At the end of the day, we need the end product. What I can say, though, is that the aviation sector in Ireland is quite big, quite pronounced. Not only the kind of flag carrier airlines that everybody knows, but the leasing industry in Ireland is huge, very, very well capitalized. And we have been engaging with a lot of companies in the leasing space that, because they're not directly burning fuel, but they still need to decarbonize as well. So there is a huge interest from the leasing industry to get involved in this development as well. Somewhere along the line, how that happens, I'm not in a position to answer, but I think there's great potential, whichever direction it takes.
Another question there is around feedstocks used in other European countries. What are the feedstocks that are being used, and is biomethane, biogas being used in other countries to produce SAF? Or are there any, if you were to point to any country across Europe as a model in which and how this sector could be developed here, is there any particular leading lights or leading examples?
Probably the Netherlands, Germany, Scandinavian countries. So in the Scandinavian countries, you see a lot of obviously wood and forestry residue being used. Germany is going down the
through
power to liquid.
gasification to produce hydrogen, and hydrogen used with CO2 to produce that. Is that?
In Germany, there is a big push for power to liquid as well. Again, hydrogen, but also biomethane and biogas. I was only there in the summer, and it's encouraging to see every farm you drive past has nearly an AD attached to it. So it's a very different picture going across Europe. But
there are models across Europe which could be utilised in Ireland. Is the answer? I think, is it to the question?
Yes, they have to amend it slightly. Like in the UK, for example, they're using a lot of MSW, municipal solid waste, but the waste that's being produced by a city like London is very different to the waste that's being produced by a city like Dublin. So the feedstock that is available in other countries may not be available in Ireland. So we have to look at that as well. And that's why we're kind of saying, well, there is a huge farming industry in Ireland. It does make sense to utilise that more. So
but the technology in terms of anaerobic digestion technology is kind of, that's the center, that's whatever about the feedstocks, the technology is similar across Europe. Is that correct?
The technology is the same, and the technology is there and is ready to go.
But the feedstocks could vary. Okay.
Thanks, Shane. I'll take that email down and I'll get in touch.
No problem. Is there we're coming to the end, Agnes. I think it's been very informative. We've had lots of interactions. We've had a very decent turnout this morning of attendees, and we have a lot of questions and interactions from our attendees. So is there any final concluding remarks that you'd like to make? Because we are at 10:28, we do finish at 10:30. So just maybe if you'd like to give any concluding remarks.
I finished at 29. No, thanks very much for everybody's attendance and questions. It's been very, very good. Please, if you have any more questions, do get in touch. We want to hear from you. We want to see the AD sector happening in Ireland. We see the aviation industry as a very good customer, probably better than the heating industry, because with global warming, we won't need as much heating in the houses anymore. But we will need the aviation fuel.
Yeah, and we look forward also from the point of view of as an Airbia member, look forward to working with you as an Airbia member to see how our members, who are the biogas developers, the technology providers, and indeed some industry users of biogas, biomethane, can potentially assist in terms of what you want to do. So I'd like to thank you, Agnes, for your contribution, your presentation, and taking the time out to join us this morning. I'd like to also thank all our participants that joined in this morning. And I'd like to particularly thank Teresa O'Brien, our colleague in Airbia, for all your work and efforts in terms of getting the webinar set up and ensuring that it ran smoothly. So I think we leave it at that, Agnes. We're just on time. So thanks again to everyone. And we look forward to meeting you all in 2 weeks' time for our next webinar. So we'll conclude on that and say have a good day. Bye-bye.